At the height of his power in the 1930s, Benito Mussolini controlled every part of Italy. His rule was filled with violence, but his world collapsed when the Allies pushed into Italy during World War II. Betrayed by his own people and hunted like an animal, he tried to escape, but in 1945, he was eventually captured and executed. However, his darkest crimes happened long before his death. As a child, Mussolini was known for being violent and mean. He picked fights with other students and teachers. When he was just 11 years old, he stabbed a classmate with a penknife during an argument. He was expelled from several schools and had a reputation for being rude, angry, and always looking for trouble. Despite this, he was smart and later got a teaching certificate in 1901. He briefly worked as a school teacher, but he hated the job and didn't last long. In his early 20s, Mussolini became involved in socialist politics. He joined the Italian Socialist Party and edited socialist newspapers, including Avanti, one of the most important left-wing papers in Italy at the time. At first, he spoke against war, capitalism, and the ruling class. But during World War I, his ideas began to change. In 1914, he shocked the socialist movement by suddenly supporting the war and calling for Italy to join. This got him kicked out of the party. After that, he started shifting to nationalism and began dreaming of a strong, united Italy, led by him. In 1919, right after World War I ended, Mussolini founded a new political group called the Fasci di Combattimento, which means combat leagues. These groups later became the National Fascist Party. The movement was violent, angry, and very extreme. Mussolini promised to bring order to Italy by crushing communists, ending strikes, and making Italy powerful again. But instead of talking, his followers, mostly ex-soldiers and jobless men, took to the streets with clubs and knives. They wore black shirts and were known as the Black Shirts. They beat up union leaders, burned down socialist offices, and even killed political enemies. They often attacked in the middle of the night wearing masks and carrying castor oil, which they forced victims to drink as a form of public humiliation and torture. Mussolini wasn't shy about using terror. He believed that fear was the best way to control people. By 1921, fascist violence had grown so much that even people who didn't support Mussolini started to think he might bring order to a broken country. Italy was in chaos after the war. Unemployment was high, strikes were everywhere, and people feared a communist revolution like the one that happened in Russia in 1917. Then in October 1922, Mussolini made his move. He organized the March on Rome, where about 30,000 black shirts marched towards the capital. It was mostly a bluff, but it worked. The government panicked. King Victor Emmanuel III, instead of calling the army to stop them, invited Mussolini to form a government. He was only 39 years old when he became Prime Minister of Italy. As soon as Mussolini came to power, he started building a system based on total control. Italy wasn't just ruled by a government anymore. It was ruled by one man. Within just a few days, he made sure no one could speak, act, or even think freely without risking their life. By 1925, Mussolini had turned Italy into a full-blown dictatorship. All political parties except his own were banned. The Italian parliament became useless. Mussolini picked who could join, and they just followed orders. He shut down hundreds of newspapers, arrested journalists, and forced editors to print only pro-fascist news. If a paper dared to criticize him, it was shut down immediately. Even jokes about him were dangerous. Anyone who spoke out or even seemed suspicious could vanish overnight. Some were grabbed from their homes in the middle of the night. Others were taken off the streets, blindfolded, and locked up. Many were never seen again. The prisons filled up with innocent people, teachers, writers, union leaders, students. Many were accused of anti-fascist thinking, even if they hadn't done anything. Some were sent to remote prison islands like Ventotene, Bonza, and Ustica, where they lived in horrible conditions far from their families. There were no fair trials. You were guilty the moment someone reported you. To enforce his rule, Mussolini created a terrifying secret police force known as the OVRA, short for the Organization for Vigilance and Repression of Anti-Fascism. Created around 1927, the Ovra operated in the shadows. They kept secret files on more than 130,000 Italians. They tapped phones, read personal letters, followed people through the streets, and used spies to report on anyone who said something wrong. People never knew who to trust. Your neighbor, your coworker, even your family could report you. If someone was arrested by the Ovra, the experience was terrifying. Torture was common. Suspects were beaten, starved, or locked in dark, cold cells for weeks. Some were forced to sign fake confessions. Others were simply killed. Fear became part of everyday life. People learned to stay quiet, never speak politics, and always smile in public. It was the only way to survive. And Mussolini didn't stop with adults. He targeted children too. He believed the best way to keep power was to shape young minds before they had a chance to think for themselves. Schools were forced to teach fascist ideas. Textbooks were rewritten to glorify Mussolini and his vision of a powerful Italy. History was twisted, facts were changed, and Mussolini was made to look like a hero in every lesson. Students had to wear uniforms, give the fascist salute, and chant slogans like, "Mussolini is always right." There was no room for disagreement. Children were taught that the war was noble and that dying for Italy was the greatest honor. School programs and youth groups like the Opera Nazionale Balilla trained boys to be soldiers and girls to be obedient mothers. They marched, learned how to handle weapons, and practiced military drills. Even games became war training. The brainwashing worked. Many children grew up idolizing Mussolini. They didn't question what they were told because they never learned how to. By the 1930s, Mussolini had created a generation raised on lies, fear, and blind loyalty. It was one of his most dangerous accomplishments. One of the most brutal and disturbing parts of Mussolini's reign happened far from Italy, in East Africa, especially in Ethiopia. Mussolini had a dream. He wanted to rebuild a great empire, just like ancient Rome. To do that, he believed Italy needed to conquer and control other countries, especially in Africa. And he saw Ethiopia as a perfect target. In October 1935, Mussolini ordered the Italian army to invade Ethiopia, also known as Abyssinia. At the time, Ethiopia was one of the few African countries that hadn't been colonized by a European power. It had defeated Italy before in the Battle of Adwa in 1896, and Mussolini wanted revenge. He also wanted to show the world that Italy was strong. The way he did it was horrifying. The war wasn't just about fighting soldiers. It became a war against civilians, against nature, and against basic humanity. The Italian army used chemical weapons, especially mustard gas, which had already been banned under the 1925 Geneva Protocol. But Mussolini didn't care. He gave secret orders to use gas from the air, from tanks, and even in bombs. Italian planes dropped mustard gas on villages, farms, and forests. Rivers were poisoned, so people couldn't drink or wash. Even Red Cross hospitals, which were supposed to be protected under international law, were bombed. Doctors and nurses died alongside the wounded. Whole communities were burned or poisoned alive. The chemicals caused people to die in the most painful ways, choking, burning, or bleeding through their skin. Many who survived were left disfigured or blind. It's estimated that between 300,000 and 500,000 Ethiopians were killed between 1935 and 1941 during Italy's invasion and occupation. The exact number may never be known because so many villages were destroyed and so many bodies were just never found. The killing didn't stop once the fighting was over. Italy stayed in Ethiopia until 1941, and during those 6 years, the violence continued. One of the darkest moments came in May 1937 in the holy town of Debre Libanos. 2 months earlier, on February 19, 1937, there had been an attempted assassination of Rodolfo Graziani, the top Italian official in Ethiopia at the time. He survived, but Mussolini was furious. He wanted revenge, not just against the attackers, but against the entire population. The Italians blamed the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, saying the monks and priests had helped the rebels. Graziani ordered a massacre. Between May 21 and 29, Italian troops entered Debre Libanos Monastery, one of the holiest places in the country. More than 2,000 people, mostly monks, priests, nuns, and churchgoers, were murdered in cold blood. Some were shot, others were stabbed with bayonets, and some were even burned alive. The killings were done methodically. Victims were rounded up, forced to kneel, and executed one by one. Some were even tortured for hours before being killed. The massacre didn't stop in the monastery. The Italians also burned nearby villages, killing men, women, and children. Survivors told of babies thrown into fires and elders beaten to death with rifle butts. Homes were looted and destroyed. What makes this even more shocking is that these were war crimes, openly committed and even photographed by some Italian soldiers. But Mussolini and his commanders never faced punishment. In fact, Graziani was later honored by the fascist regime as a hero. Ethiopians were treated as less than human. Racial laws were passed to keep Italians and Africans apart. Mixed marriages were banned, and the local people could be beaten or jailed for small things like speaking against Italians or even walking on the wrong side of the road. Many Italians in the army believed they were superior, and Mussolini encouraged this thinking. He talked about civilizing Africa, but what really happened was slavery, torture, and mass murder. For much of his early rule, Mussolini did not focus on race or religion. In fact, there were Jewish members in his fascist party when it first started in 1919. But all of that changed in the late 1930s when Mussolini grew closer to Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Mussolini admired Hitler's strength and the way he ruled with fear. Slowly, he began to copy Nazi ideas, especially when it came to racism and anti-Semitism. In 1938, Mussolini passed the Italian racial laws, also known as the Manifesto of Race. These laws completely changed life for Jewish people in Italy. Within days, Jews were banned from teaching, going to school, serving in the military, or holding government jobs. Jewish doctors couldn't treat non-Jewish patients. Businesses owned by Jews were taken away or forced to shut down. Jews were kicked out of public parks, libraries, and universities. At first, these laws were terrible, but didn't involve mass killing like in Nazi Germany. That changed in 1943 after Mussolini was removed from power and then rescued by German forces. Hitler helped Mussolini set up a puppet government in the north of Italy called the Italian Social Republic. This so-called republic had no real power. It was completely controlled by the Nazis, and it became a dangerous place for Jews. Between 1943 and 1945, more than 7,500 Italian Jews were rounded up by the fascist police and German soldiers. They were forced into crowded trains with no food, no water, and no idea where they were going. Many were sent to Auschwitz. Others ended up in Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, and other camps, and most of them never came back. Whole families were wiped out. Some Jews were hidden by brave Italians who risked their lives to help. Many were caught. The trains they were packed into were freezing in the winter and boiling hot in the summer. People died just on the way there. Mussolini didn't just allow this to happen, he helped it. His government provided names, addresses, and identification papers. He signed orders that allowed Jews to be handed over to the Nazis. He knew they were being sent to die, even when he saw evidence of the death camps. He never tried to stop the deportations. Mussolini's racism didn't only target Jews. In Italy's African colonies, especially Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia, the fascist regime passed racist laws that treated local people as second-class citizens, or even worse. In Libya, Mussolini's army carried out one of its worst crimes. From 1929 to 1934, thousands of Bedouins, nomadic Arab tribes, were rounded up and forced into concentration camps deep in the desert. The fascists wanted to crush any resistance and steal the land for Italian settlers. So they burned villages, took away animals, and arrested anyone who refused to obey. The camps were a death sentence. People lived in tents with no floors, surrounded by barbed wire. There was no clean water, barely any food, and no medicine. Disease spread quickly. Many died of starvation, thirst, or illness. Historians estimate that up to 100,000 Libyans died during this brutal campaign. In Eritrea, similar racist policies were enforced. Under Mussolini's fascist rule, women in Italy and the colonies were stripped of power, freedom, and basic human dignity. Mussolini believed that women's only job was to serve men and produce children for the state. His regime turned this belief into law. Inside Italy, Mussolini passed strict rules about what women could and couldn't do. By the late 1920s, women were pushed out of professional jobs like law, politics, and even teaching in high schools. They were told to get married, stay at home, and have as many children as possible. The state rewarded women not for intelligence or talent, but for giving birth. If a woman had 6 or more children, she could receive a medal from the government. Those with 10 or more were called heroic mothers. But it wasn't out of care. It was all about building a stronger army. More babies meant more future soldiers for Mussolini's wars. Birth control and abortion were banned. Doctors were ordered to report women who asked about it. Even talking about family planning was seen as unpatriotic. Women who didn't marry or couldn't have children were shamed by society and the government. Their only value was their womb. But the situation was even worse in the African colonies. During the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935 and throughout the occupation that followed, Italian soldiers committed mass rape. Women and girls, sometimes as young as 11 or 12 years old, were dragged from their homes and assaulted in front of their families. Many women were killed afterwards, either to hide the crime or simply because the soldiers could do whatever they wanted without punishment. Survivors often faced even more horror. Some were forced into military brothels or camps, where they were used as sex slaves by Italian officers. They were beaten, starved, and raped repeatedly. In Libya, similar abuses were carried out. The fascist army rounded up Bedouin women and girls, accusing them of helping resistance fighters. Many were imprisoned in harsh desert camps. The men were killed or sent away, and the women were left behind with the soldiers. Stories from survivors tell of daily abuse. No food, no protection. Back in Italy, women who tried to speak out or fight back were also crushed by Mussolini's system. If a woman joined an anti-fascist group or protested against the regime, she could be arrested without trial. Even worse, some women were forced into psychiatric hospitals, not because they were mentally ill, but because they refused to stay quiet. Doctors gave them electric shocks, strong sedatives, or locked them in isolation for days. It was a cruel way to silence anyone who didn't fit the fascist ideal of a quiet, obedient wife and mother. Mussolini saw himself as a godlike figure. He made people call him Il Duce, which means the leader. His pictures were everywhere, in classrooms, offices, and streets. People were forced to cheer for him, even if they hated him. He held huge parades and speeches to show off his power. But behind the scenes, Mussolini was paranoid and insecure. He had over 20 different bodyguards and was constantly afraid of being killed. He even banned people from walking behind him. He also made Italy enter World War II in 1940, thinking it would make him more powerful. But it was a disaster. Italian soldiers weren't ready, and they lost badly. Towns were bombed, soldiers died in the thousands, and people starved. By April 1945, the war was almost over. Germany was falling, and Italy was in ruins. Mussolini tried to escape with his lover Clara Petacci, dressed as a German soldier. But on April 27, 1945, partisans stopped them near Lake Como. The next day, on April 28, 1945, Mussolini and Clara were shot without trial. The execution took place in the small town of Giulini di Mezzegra. Some say they were shot in the chest. Others say they were machine-gunned. Either way, it was quick. Their bodies were then thrown into a truck and taken to the Piazzale Loreto in Milan, the same place where Mussolini had once hung the bodies of partisans in 1944. This time it was his turn. His corpse, along with Clara's and a few other fascist leaders, was hung upside down by meat hooks at a gas station. People spat on them, threw rocks, kicked them, and even shot at the bodies. It was a moment of pure rage. Mussolini left Italy in ruins. his crimes were not just political, they were deeply human. Many documents about his regime are still being uncovered today, showing just how far his cruelty went.